Hello again, everybody, and God be with you. This week's story from Bible Baddies is another story from the Old Testament. It's from the book of Esther. It's called The Proud Man's Tale. And this, as usual, is how Bob Hartman introduces it. Pride's a funny thing. At first, it doesn't seem all that bad. Self-esteem with attitude. That's what it looks like. But there's a difference. Self-esteem is all about appreciating yourself for who you really are. It's based on honesty and truth. Pride, however, is rooted in self-deception, in a lie. It's all about convincing yourself that you're smarter or stronger or more important than you really are. Take Haman, for example. He thought he was so important that he could destroy an entire race of people just because one member of that race had offended him. And to be fair, he almost got away with it. Ironically, though, it was that very same pride which tripped Haman up in the end. His confidence in his own cleverness and power blinded him to the possibility that someone might actually be able to wreck his plans. Maybe that's the way it is with every kind of badness. At first, it looks as if the victims are the only ones who get hurt. But in the end, the people who carry out the evil deeds are sometimes affected just as badly. Haman walked through the king's gate, nodding and waving as he went. The faces were familiar. Royal officials, noblemen, important people, all of them with whom he had worked and plotted and argued and fought. There were friends and there were enemies. There were wise men and there were fools. There were those who looked upon him with admiration and those who could barely hide their disgust. But each of them bowed as he passed, for Haman was now the second most powerful person in all of Persia, King Xerxes' right-hand man. Haman grinned, and Haman strutted. A peacock would have struggled to match his pride. Then Haman came to the man at the end of the line. Ah, yes, Mordecai, he reminded himself. Mordecai the Jew, the one who uncovered a plot to kill the king, or something like that. And he glanced at the man and tilted his head ever so slightly, as if to say, now it is the time for you to bow. But no bow came, not even the slightest hint of honour. I'm sorry, said Mordecai. I bow to no man, but to the Lord God alone. Haman did nothing. He did not frown. He did not scowl. He did not stop and shout and swear. No, his face showed no emotion whatsoever. He simply walked on, careful to maintain his dignity. But inside, Haman was furious. How dare he? Haman fumed. I will not stand for this insult. Mordecai and all his people will pay for the way he treated me today. And that is why, in the very first month of the next year, Haman went to see the king. Your Majesty, he said, there is a certain group of people in our land, people who are different from the rest of us. They worship a different God. They keep different customs. And sometimes those customs require them to break our laws. They are the Jews, Your Majesty, and it seems to me that it would be in your best interest to have them, shall we say, removed from your kingdom. I feel so strongly about this, in fact, that I would be willing to put up 10,000 talents of my own silver to pay for their destruction. King Xerxes considered Haman's request. Then he took off his signet ring and gave it to his right-hand man. "Do as you wish," he said, "and you can keep your money. If these people are as dangerous as you say, then it is the king's business to deal with them. Set the date, seal the orders with my ring, and let the Jews be destroyed." Haman did as the king commanded. He wrote out orders for the destruction of the Jews, and being a superstitious man, he cast lots to determine on which day it should happen. When the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar, Haman was just a little disappointed. He would have to wait nearly a year for his revenge. And then he smiled, for the long wait meant that he would have the chance to gloat every time he walked past the king's gate, every time he saw his insolent enemy Mordecai. What Haman did not know was that the God of Mordecai and his people had plans as well. For, in spite of all his pride and self-importance, there was a tiny piece of information that the king's right-hand man did not possess. And how could he? For it was unknown to the king as well. But Mordecai knew it, and so did Mordecai's God, for it had to do with Mordecai's cousin, Hadassah, the most beautiful girl in the land. Hadassah's mother and father were dead, so Mordecai had raised her, treating her like one of his own daughters. When King Xerxes had decided he needed a new wife, beautiful girls from all over the country came to Xerxes' harem. Among them was Hadassah, sent by Mordecai. He had given her a Persian name, Esther, and he had told her that she must by no means reveal that she was a Jew. This was Mordecai's big secret. And when the time had come for the king to choose his bride, Esther's beauty so overwhelmed him that the crown was placed on her head, and a Jewish girl became queen of all Persia. When Mordecai heard about Haman's plot, he went immediately to Esther's palace. He stood outside the gates. He tore his clothes. He wept and he wailed. At once, Queen Esther sent her servant Hathach to find out what was the matter. Mordecai sent her this message: "Haman plans to kill all the Jews in Persia. You must go to the king and stop him." Esther sent a message back. It was not encouraging. "Oh, you don't understand," it read. "I cannot go to the king unless he summons me. To go uninvited would be certain death, and I have not heard from him for a month." Mordecai's response was brief and plain. "Don't think for a minute that you will escape just because you are the queen. If you do nothing, you will perish with the rest of us. But is it not possible that the Lord God has put you in your position for just such a time as this?" So Esther agreed to go to see the king. She went uninvited and unannounced. And even though he could have put her to death for doing so, he was so taken with her beauty that he extended his golden scepter in her direction and invited her to enter his throne room. "What do you want, my dear?" King Xerxes asked. "Only that you and your right-hand man, Haman, should join me for dinner," she replied. And so it was arranged. When he received the invitation, Haman was more puffed up than ever. "Look," he said to his wife, Zeresh. "Look," he said to all his friends, "an invitation to Queen Esther's table. Why, it's almost like I'm one of the family." So Haman went to dinner, and as they were sipping their wine, King Xerxes turned to his queen and said, "So, tell me, my dear, why have you invited us here? I'll wager that there's something you want. You only have to ask, you know, and half my kingdom will be yours." Esther blushed, and then she answered mysteriously, My request is simple. Come again tomorrow, and you and your right-hand man Haman, and I will tell you what I want. The king was intrigued. He liked this little game, and so once again he agreed. Haman, meanwhile, couldn't believe his luck. Dinner at the queen's table 2 days in a row. But when he left the palace and passed the king's gate, his mood turned suddenly sour. For there was Mordecai again, Mordecai who refused to bow before him. Just you wait, a man muttered to himself. The time will come when you will fall before me, begging for your life. He was still muttering when he arrived home, so his wife suggested a simple solution. Why wait till the end of the year to have Mordecai executed? She said. If he troubles you so, why not go to the king first thing in the morning and ask him to hang Mordecai? Then you can enjoy your dinner with the queen and not worry about having to look on that insolent man's face again. Haman smiled, just a little at first, and then a huge grin broke out all over his face. Yes, excellent, he cried. And just so that everything would be ready, he ordered his servants to build a gallows 75 feet high in his own back garden. The next morning, Haman strutted off to the king's palace, whistling as he went. There was no reason for Xerxes to deny his request. He was the king's right-hand man. So the order would be given. Mordecai would be executed, and this would be the happiest days of Haman's life. But once again, there was something that Haman did not know, something he could never have guessed, something that the God of Mordecai and his people would use to ensure that Haman's day did not turn out so well after all. King Xerxes had suffered through a sleepless night, and every time King Xerxes could not sleep, he ordered one of his servants to read to him from the history of Persia. And it just so happened that the passage the king's servant read on that night, the night before Haman's morning visit, was the passage that described how Mordecai had uncovered a plot to kill the king. Tell me, King Xerxes said to his servant, was Mordecai ever rewarded for his noble deed? Not that I can remember, answered the servant. So the next morning, when Haman presented himself before the king, Xerxes asked him a question. What would you do if you wanted to honor a nobleman who had served you well? Puffed up as he was, Haman naturally assumed that the king was referring to him. So he smiled broadly and offered the following suggestion. Take a royal robe that you yourself had worn and a royal horse that you yourself have ridden. Put the robe on the man, put the man on the horse, and then have some other royal official parade him through the city, shouting, "This is what happens to a man who earns the king's pleasure." An excellent idea, the king shouted. Now I want you to do all that for Mordecai. Mordecai? Haman choked. Yes, Mordecai, the king repeated. Put my robe on his back, put him on my horse, and walk before him, announcing to everyone what happens to the man who earns my pleasure. Haman nodded. Haman bowed. Haman tried very hard not to cringe. Then Haman did what the king commanded, growing angrier with every royal hoofbeat. When he returned home and told his wife what had happened, she sighed and shook her head. It would be foolish to ask for his execution now. The God Mordecai serves must be very powerful indeed. The best you can do is enjoy your dinner with the queen and pray that nothing worse happens. So Haman went to Queen Esther's palace, but he did not strut and he did not whistle. He walked with his head lowered, hoping to avoid the wrath of Mordecai's God. All seemed well at dinner, however. There was laughing and there was joking, and Haman's mood began to brighten. Then, over a goblet of wine, King Xerxes turned to his wife and asked, "So, why have you invited us again, my dear? Tell me what you wish for. You may ask for anything, up to half my kingdom, and it will be yours." Queen Esther suddenly looked serious. Tears filled her eyes. "Your Majesty," she said, "there is someone who wants to destroy me and all my people. He has already signed the orders. The date has already been set, and unless you do something to spare us, in the 12th month, the month of Adar, we will all die." The king's face turned serious too, then red with rage. "Who has done this thing?" he shouted. "Tell me, and he is the one who will die." Esther turned her head slowly and looked straight at a trembling Haman. "I know this may come as a surprise," she said, "but I am a Jew, Your Majesty, and the person who wants to kill me and all my people, is your own right-hand man." And then she pointed. "It is Haman." King Xerxes banged his fist on the table, spilling his wine. He loved his wife, his beautiful wife, and yet he had signed the order. So he stormed out into the garden to think. Haman was no fool. He could see what was coming. So when Queen Esther rose from the table and walked away to wait on her couch, he followed her, then threw himself on the couch beside her, begging for mercy. It was at that moment that the king returned to the room. "What is this?" he cried. "First you want to kill my wife, and now you want to make advances to her." No, Your Majesty," Haman stuttered. But before he could finish his sentence, King Xerxes had called for his guards. "Reverse the order to destroy the Jews," he announced, "and put this man to death instead." "As you wish, Your Majesty," said the chief guard. And then he added, "There is already a gallows prepared at Haman's house. In fact, rumour has it that he built it for Mordecai, who saved the king's life." "Then hang Haman on it," the king commanded, "and let this be a lesson to anyone who displeases the king." So Haman was hanged, the Jews were saved, and Queen Esther became a hero to her people, a hero whose deeds are celebrated to this day. So, story about pride. Like Bob, I've often struggled with pride. My dad used to say, "Be proud with what you do." With what he meant was, do it to the best of my ability. But then he would also say sometimes pride goes before a fall. So it's really understanding which pride we're talking about. There you are. There'll be another story next week, and I rather think it will be from the New Testament this time. In the meantime, God be with you.